People always ask me why I did it. Why on his birthday? Why in front of everyone he loved? The honest answer is that I did not think I was doing anything wrong. I thought I was being funny. I thought I was being free. I have spent a long time since then, sitting with the difference between those two things and what it actually cost me to confuse them. My name is Victoria. I am 38 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life making sure that no one in any room I walk into can ignore me. I am a marketing director at a brand consultancy downtown, and I am good at my job in the specific way that requires you to be a little bit louder than everyone else, and a little bit faster, and a little bit more willing to say the thing no one else will say. I have always believed that was a strength. I still believe it, most of the time. What I am less certain about now is whether strength and damage can live so close together that you cannot tell them apart until something breaks. Daniel and I had been married for 11 years when his 40th birthday came around. He is an architect with his own small firm, quiet and methodical and patient, in a way that I used to find comforting, and then later found irritating, and then later still stopped noticing entirely. He left notes in my coat pockets in the early years of our marriage, small folded ones with specific things written on them. And one evening in September, I reached into the pocket of an old grey wool coat and found one I had missed. It said that my 10 o'clock meeting would go fine because he already knew it would. I stood in the coat closet for a long moment reading it, and something moved through me that I did not examine. Then I put it back, closed the door, and went to pour myself a glass of wine. The silver glass was on the shelf behind me, where it always sat. His parents had given it to us as a wedding gift, hand-engraved with our initials, and it was beautiful, and I never used it for anything. I used a regular glass instead and walked past the silver one the way you walk past furniture you have stopped seeing. At dinner that night, Daniel mentioned that his business partner had asked whether we were coming to the firm's autumn gathering, and that he had already said yes for both of us. He said it as information, not as a question, because he was the kind of man who made decisions through quiet action and assumed I was already beside him in them. I said okay. I changed the subject. That night I planned his birthday dinner without asking whether he wanted something large or small, and I booked the private dining room at Oleander because I had already checked availability and the date worked. He said it sounded good. He always said things sounded good. I told myself that was the problem. The birthday dinner was still 6 weeks away when the rooftop event happened, and looking back now I can see that the rooftop was where things actually began, even though nothing dramatic occurred and no one would have been able to point to a specific moment and name it. It was a company event on a Thursday in October, held at a bar with a view of the river and not enough heaters, and the wind came off the water in a way that made everyone stand slightly closer together than they normally would. I stayed 2 hours longer than I told Daniel I would. His name was Marcus Webb, and he was a client who had recently become a consultant on a campaign I was running, and he was the kind of person who argued with you and expected you to argue back. A few weeks earlier he had told me, in front of the entire project room, that my Q3 projection had a structural flaw, and here was why, and he had been right. And I had told him so, and the surprise on his face when I admitted it was something I had not been able to stop thinking about since. There was a particular quality to being challenged by someone who did not immediately retreat when you pushed back, who held his position and made you hold yours. And I had been sitting across a dinner table from a man who said things sounded good for long enough that I had forgotten what the other thing felt like. I had confused that forgetting for a problem with my marriage when it was actually a problem with me. But that distinction was not available to me yet. We stayed on the rooftop until most of the other guests had left, talking about the campaign and then about other things, and I remember that at some point the city below us went through that particular shift it makes around 11 p.m, quieter and more itself, and I was aware that I did not want to leave. At 9:47 p.m, I texted Daniel to say I was leaving in 20 minutes. I got home at 12:08. He was in the living room when I came in, sitting in the armchair near the window with the lamp on and a book he had not been reading. He asked where I had been. I said the event ran long, that I had lost track of time, that I was tired, and could we please talk about it tomorrow? He said we could, but that he wanted to say something first. He asked me to sit down, and I did, because something in his voice was different than usual, measured in a way that was not quite calm. He told me that at 9:47 I had sent a message saying I was leaving in 20 minutes, and that he had checked his phone at 10:15 and at 11 and at 11:30, and that I had come through the door at 12 past midnight. He said he noticed, specifically, that my bag smelled different than it had when I left for work in the morning, something with cedar in it that was not a smell from our apartment. He said he was not interested in spending his evenings worrying, and that if something had changed between us, he would rather know it directly than figure it out from timestamps and silence. I told him that was exactly the problem. I said that I could not attend an event for my own job without him logging the hours and analysing what I smelled like, and that this was what I had been trying to explain to him for years. I said it was exhausting. I got up and went to the bedroom. He did not follow me. In the morning he made coffee and left it on the counter for me and said nothing about the night before, and I told myself that was because he knew he had overreacted. He did not have another conversation with me about it for several days. He simply started being very quiet in a way that was somehow louder than before, a quality of attention that I felt across rooms without being able to describe it. The following week, a colleague who had been at the rooftop event stopped by my desk in the morning and mentioned that Marcus had brought me up in a meeting, by which she meant professionally. But there was a particular quality to the way she said it, a half pause before the word professionally, that stayed with me for the rest of the day. I kept returning to it the way you return to a sentence in a book that means more than it appears to mean, turning it over without arriving at anything conclusive. Priya, my closest friend since university, had been at the event too, and 2 days later I sent her a message asking her to say, if anyone asked, that she had been with me all evening. She replied within 2 minutes. She said yes. I told myself she was a good friend and did not think any further about what I had asked her to do, or what it meant that I had asked it, or whether a person who had nothing to hide would have sent that message at all. By then, I had already texted Marcus twice and he had texted me 3 times, and none of the messages were about the campaign. Daniel's second attempt to address things came a few days later, on a Sunday afternoon, when he sat down across from me at the kitchen table and said that he wanted to be honest with me. He said he had been thinking about the event and that he was not trying to monitor me or control my schedule, but that he had a specific concern he wanted to put into words. He said that the person who texted him at 9:47 did not seem like a person who was planning to stay another 2 hours, and that the difference between what I had said and what had happened was something he could not quite make fit, and he needed me to help him understand it. He said that he trusted me and that he wanted to keep trusting me, and that the only thing which would make that difficult was if the pattern of coming home later than I said kept happening without an explanation, and that a home where neither of them knew what was true was not a home he could live in. I told him he was describing my independence as though it were a problem he needed to manage, and that this was the thing I had been saying for years, that he could not let me simply exist in my own life without turning it into a question he needed answered. He looked at me for a moment with the particular expression he had when he was deciding whether to continue or withdraw, and then he picked up his coffee cup and said he was going to his office to finish some drawings. He closed the door gently. I sat at the table for a while in the quiet he left behind and could not quite locate the feeling of having won the exchange. The private dining room at Oleander held 12 people comfortably, with cedar panels on the walls and candles in small glass holders along the centre of the table, and when you first walked in, it smelled of warm bread and something woody underneath it that I had always liked. Daniel's parents had flown in from out of town, and his sister Clare was there, and his two friends from university, and his business partner, and his wife, and my colleague Anna, and Priya, and two other people who filled the table and made it feel like a celebration. Daniel looked genuinely happy for the first hour, and watching him across the table, I had the specific discomfort of remembering that I had once been the source of that happiness, without effort, without performance, simply by being in the room with him. I had brought the silver glass from the shelf at home. I wrapped it in a cloth and put it in my bag because I thought it would be a meaningful detail, a callback to the wedding, something that would make the evening feel considered and personal. Daniel's mother asked about it when I took it out before dessert, and I said it was the engraved one from the wedding gift, and she said it had been her own mother's design and that she was glad to see it used. When I stood up to give the toast, the table went quiet in the way tables do, and I felt very clearly the particular pleasure of having everyone looking in my direction. I said Daniel's name. I said that he was the most patient man I had ever met in my life, which was true, and the room smiled, the comfortable reflexive smile of people who expect a toast to be warm and are settling in for warmth. I said that I had never once heard him raise his voice in 11 years of marriage, which was also true, and a few people nodded in the way people nod when they are being told something they have already observed. Then I said that I had spent 11 years trying to get a rise out of him, and that I could tell everyone at that table it had not happened yet. And there was a soft ripple of laughter, the polite kind that fills a room because silence is more uncomfortable than agreement. I raised the silver glass and said, to a man who had never once had the nerve to tell his wife she was wrong. And I smiled, because I believed this was the kind of honesty that people who were strong enough to be real with each other spoke in front of the people they loved. 3 people laughed, not Daniel, not his mother. Not Clare, who was sitting at the far end of the table with her hands flat on the tablecloth and an expression that I registered briefly and then moved past. The way you move past something in your peripheral vision that you choose not to turn and look at directly. Daniel raised his own glass. He looked at me across the table for a moment, not with anger and not with the performance of dignity, but with something quiet and very finished, the way you look at a thing you have decided about and are no longer going to revisit. Then he set his glass down on the table without drinking from it and turned to his father and asked how the flight had been, and the conversation at his end of the table moved forward and did not come back to me. I sat back down. I thought he was sulking. I thought he was doing the thing I had just described to the room, retreating into silence because he could not manage to respond, and that this was simply the confirmation of everything I had said. I reached for the regular wine glass instead of the silver one, and leaned over to Priya and made a joke about the bread, and she laughed, and I felt the moment pass over me without quite landing. The dinner continued. Dessert came. Daniel spoke with his parents and with his business partner, and with his university friends, and he was warm and present and entirely ordinary about it, moving through the table the way a person moves when they are genuinely at ease, and this bothered me in a way that anger would not have, because anger would have been legible, and this was not. When guests started leaving, Daniel's mother stopped next to me in the space near the door. She held my hand briefly, just for a moment, and said that the silver glass had been designed by her grandmother and given to her as a young woman, and that she had passed it on to Daniel specifically. She said nothing else, and the way she said it was not warm or cold but simply factual, the way people speak when they want a thing to be understood precisely. Then she went to find Daniel. In the parking lot, I found him standing with his father near the car. He said goodbye to the last guests with the same easy warmth he had carried through the dinner, and then he walked to where I was standing and asked if I had the car keys. I said yes, and gave them to him. He unlocked the car. He did not say anything about the toast on the drive home, and when I tried twice to start a conversation about how the evening had gone, he answered briefly and kept his eyes on the road, and the silence in the car had a specific texture to it that was different from his usual quiet. Claire called me 4 days after the birthday dinner, and she did not begin the call by asking how I was. She said she was calling because she thought I should know that what I had done at the dinner table had not been funny, and that it had not been affectionate, and that everyone at the table had understood it, except possibly me. She said that he had not laughed. She said that his mother had cried in the car on the way back to the hotel. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the way someone cries when they are absorbing something they were not prepared for. She said she was telling me this as information because she thought I deserved to hear it plainly, and not because she was looking for an argument. I told her that Daniel loved the fact that I was direct, that we had always been that kind of couple, that people who were honest with each other sometimes said things that were uncomfortable, and that was the point of honesty. I said that Claire had always been protective of Daniel in a way that made it difficult for me to feel truly welcomed by his family, and that this was not the first time her concern for her brother had come across as judgment of me, and that I thought she might want to consider how much of this call was actually about me, and how much was about her own long-standing difficulty with my presence in his life. She was quiet for a moment, long enough that I thought she might simply hang up. Then she said that was a smart response, that I had put her inside the problem, so now we were talking about her family dynamics instead of what I had done at the table. She said she hoped Daniel was okay. She hung up. I sat in my car outside my office for a while after the call ended and looked at the street and told myself that Claire had always had this quality, this way of positioning herself as the reasonable one while carrying her own considerable store of judgment and preference. But something about the call stayed with me in a way I could not dissolve through rearrangement, some specific word or phrase I kept returning to without wanting to. She said his mother cried in the car. I had not expected that detail, and I could not make it mean what I needed it to mean, so I left it where it was and went back inside. That night, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark when I came home at 20 minutes to 2 in the morning. No light, no phone, no book. He was just sitting there. And when I turned on the kitchen light, he did not flinch or look embarrassed, just looked at me steadily with the patient exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something for a long time. I asked what he was doing. He said he was thinking. I asked about what, and he said about us, quietly and without drama. And I said it was almost 2 in the morning, and I was exhausted, and could we please not do this tonight? And he said okay. He did not get up. When I went to bed, he was still at the table, and I lay in the dark telling myself that he was trying to make me feel guilty, that sitting in the dark was a form of emotional leverage, that this was exactly what he did instead of having an actual conversation. What I did not let myself consider was that sitting at your own kitchen table in the middle of the night with no audience and no agenda is not a performance. Earlier that week, Claire had sent a follow-up text that mentioned, in passing, that Daniel's business partner had apparently asked whether everything was okay at home, because a man named Marcus Webb had come to Daniel's building twice to meet with me, and the second time he had gone upstairs, and it had come up somehow in an unrelated conversation. She said she was not accusing anyone of anything. She said she was just mentioning it. I read the message 3 times and put my phone face down on the desk, and then I picked it up and read it a 4th time, and the cold, specific feeling in my chest was something I recognized as fear and reframed immediately as irritation. Later, at home, I went into Daniel's home office to look for a charger I thought I had left there. The financial binders and insurance folder that he normally kept on the open desk were gone. The desk was completely clear in a way that looked deliberate rather than tidy. I tried the cabinet beneath it and the handle did not turn. It had a small combination lock on it that I had never seen before, a simple one, silver and new. I stood there for a moment looking at it, my hand still on the handle, and then I told myself it must be a client confidentiality thing, a work matter, something that had nothing to do with me, and I went to find my charger somewhere else. But I thought about that lock for the rest of the evening without admitting to myself that I was thinking about it. Daniel asked me that evening, very casually, whether I had spoken to Claire recently. I said yes, briefly. He said he was glad we were in communication. He picked up a book and read, and I watched him from across the room with the specific discomfort of a person who cannot find the angle from which the other person looks like the problem. The following Friday, I went to the Meridian Hotel bar to meet Marcus, and I had 2 glasses of wine, and by 9 in the evening I was sitting at a corner table with the candles on, and the room around us comfortable and easy in the way rooms are when you have decided to stop managing yourself for the evening. I thought about Claire's voice saying he did not laugh, and about the locked cabinet, and about the way Daniel had set his glass down at the birthday table without drinking from it, and about the kitchen in the dark, and all of it accumulated into something I did not want to carry carefully anymore. I took out my phone and opened Instagram and posted a story. It was a photo of the bar, taken from where I was sitting, showing the candles and the table and the warm, dim quality of the room. And at the periphery of the frame there was Marcus's jacket, draped over the back of the chair beside me. I tagged the Meridian. I did it because I had spent weeks feeling watched and catalogued and quietly organised against, and I wanted Daniel to see that I was not going to perform innocence for his benefit, that I was somewhere, and I was not hiding it, and he could do with that whatever he chose to do. I told myself it was honesty. I told myself it was freedom. I posted it, and put my phone back in my bag, and finished my wine, and the bartender moved behind the counter with the efficient neutrality of someone who has witnessed this particular species of decision many times and drawn no particular conclusions from any of them. The evening continued, and I took a car home after 11, and the city moved past the windows in the specific way it moves when you have had enough to drink that everything looks slightly more significant than it is. In the morning, Daniel was in the kitchen when I came out, and he had his phone on the counter in front of him, and the screen was showing the Instagram story, still within its 24 hours. He said he had seen it. He said he recognized the Meridian because we had gone there 3 times in the years before things changed between us, and that the memories he associated with that bar were specific enough that seeing it tagged made something land in him that he did not enjoy. He said he recognized the jacket in the frame because he knew who wore that particular color, and he asked me directly whether I was with someone, not as an accusation and not as a performance of restraint, but as a plain question he had decided to put plainly. I told him that this was exactly what I had always said about him, that the moment I was out in my own life, living my actual life, attending a bar with people I knew, his first response was to turn it into a question about his ego and his insecurity, and that I was not going to be interrogated in my own home over a photograph of a bar. He said that the Venmo payment I made 3 weeks ago, the one listed as consulting work, corresponded to an amount that matched a hotel receipt he had encountered, and he asked me to explain that specifically and by name. I told him the conversation was over. He said he understood. He said he was going to handle the situation the way it needed to be handled, that he had already spoken to someone about it, and that I should think carefully about what I wanted the next few weeks to look like. He said this standing in the kitchen doorway with his coffee cup in his hand, and his voice was entirely calm. Not the calm of a man suppressing anger, but the calm of a man who has already moved past the part of the situation where anger was relevant. I told him to go ahead and handle things. I said it in the tone I used when I was fairly certain nothing would happen, and he looked at me for a moment in a way that made me wish I had used a different tone. He set his coffee cup on the counter beside the small notebook that had appeared there recently, wrote something in it, and closed it, and went to his office. I heard him on the phone for a long time afterward, his voice low and steady through the closed door, and I stood in the kitchen and did not move for longer than I needed to. That Sunday morning I checked my phone and the Instagram story had 214 views. I lay in bed looking at the number and waited for the feeling I had expected, the feeling of being free, of having acted rather than reacted, of having proven something. The number sat there. It was 214 people who had seen a photo of a bar, and none of them were the one person I had posted it for, and even the one person I had posted it for would not give me what I had wanted him to give me, which I was only beginning to understand was not anger or fear or capitulation, but simply the sight of him flinching. I put the phone face down and stared at the ceiling, and the silence of the apartment was specific and total in a way it had not been before. In the days that followed, he was organized and quiet, in a way that had a different quality than his usual quiet. He took calls behind closed doors, and the calls were long. The notebook on the kitchen counter moved position each morning. One evening he asked me, without any particular emphasis, whether I had retained an attorney yet. I said no. He said okay, wrote something brief in the notebook, and closed it. And the sound of it closing was very small and entirely final. The mediation office was on the 14th floor of a downtown building, in a room called Conference Room B, and the mediator's name was Rosario, and she was in her 50s and had the specific quality of a person who has heard every version of every story and has no investment in which version is correct. Daniel was already seated when I arrived, and he did not look at me when I came in, not with hostility, but with the deliberate neutrality of a person who has made a decision and finished making it. Rosario placed a document on the table in front of me and explained what it was. It was a petition for dissolution of marriage, filed with the county, accompanied by a motion for temporary financial orders, which included a freeze on the joint accounts pending documentation of marital assets and a proposed division of the shared property at our apartment address. There was a filing date stamped at the top and a first hearing date 31 days out. She told me that Daniel had requested the mediation as a procedural courtesy and that the petition had already been filed before this meeting. She then referred to 3 items in the supporting materials. The first was Instagram location data from the Meridian, time-stamped, cross-referenced with a Venmo payment listed under consulting that corresponded to a hotel receipt. The second was building access logs from Daniel's firm, confirming Marcus Webb's visits, provided voluntarily by the business partner. The third was a screenshot of a text message in which I had asked Priya to confirm I had been with her all evening on the night of the rooftop event, a screenshot that Priya had given to Clare and that Clare had passed forward. I told Rosario that Daniel had been emotionally withholding throughout our marriage and that this entire process was a form of control and that the documentation she was describing was the behavior of a person who surveilled his wife rather than trusted her. I said the Venmo transfer was for legitimate work. Rosario said she understood my characterization and would note it, and then she asked me to explain, specifically, why the hotel receipt date corresponded to an evening I had told Daniel I was at a friend's house and what deliverables the consulting work had produced. She asked it without effect. She was not trying to be cruel. She simply was not going to hold the frame I was offering her. I said I would like to speak to my attorney. She said that was my right, and that she would schedule the next session accordingly. Closure snapshot. She is in the sublet by the end of the month, a one-bedroom place with someone else's furniture and a desk in the corner that is also where she eats. The joint accounts are frozen, and she is operating on her salary alone. Priya has sent a message saying she needs space and has not sent another one. The group chat with the mutual couples is silent, and she checks it every morning anyway. Marcus texted once, used the word complicated, and has not written again. The silver glass arrives in a box with his handwriting on the outside, wrapped in newspaper, and she sets the box by the door without opening it. One evening she thinks about the note in the coat pocket, the one about the 10 o'clock meeting, and she stands in the small kitchen for a while with nothing particular to do and no audience to perform composure for. She had spent 11 years making sure no one could make her small, and she had kept that promise exactly, and she is standing in a furnished apartment that belongs to someone else, in a life that currently fits no one, and the promise is intact. And she is only beginning to understand that keeping it was never the same thing as being free.